I have some historic familiarity, obviously, not only with the initiative, but with many of the players who've been involved in this over time. And I sort of traced it accurately or otherwise in my own mind to that 1992, I think it was Quail 3 effort or symposium in Kansas City, maybe. I know Lenny Brennan was heavily involved. And of course, I spoke at one of your meetings in 2002, and then I interacted with members of some of the members at the Pheasants and Quail Symposia in 2014 and 2016. So first of all, I have some insight to the kind of inner workings, if you will, and the development of this program and this initiative and what you all represent and stand for. So I want to give you a kind of sense of an outsider, but I also wanted, of course, to let you know that I have not been completely lost on some desert island with respect to the initiatives that have been taken for bobwhite quail. It is easy for people to perhaps not recognize their own achievements sometimes. It is easy for us when we are dedicated passionately to something that matters to us regardless of exigencies, that we are not always focused on what we have brought to the particular movement that we are so impassioned by and for. And part of what I want to do, at least, is to give you my impressions of who you are and what you have done. Now, most of you know, or some of you know, I guess, that I have been heavily involved in the discussions around historic trajectories for conservation in North America and now increasingly globally. That I have been an outspoken proponent of the North American model. Not someone who idolizes it, but somebody who speaks about its strengths and its history and its achievements. And therefore, I am always interested in those efforts that seem to be able to reach beyond the normal kind of chaos of everyday existence to build things that are strategic, that are far-reaching, that are exemplary, that are things that others can learn from, things that contribute to knowledge, things that matter culturally to people, things that have broad scale, geographic scale, but also broad scale thinking at the heart of them, because these are the kinds of things that over the long term will make the massive difference for conservation. The North American model itself is highly relevant to what you do, of course, and I'm sure many of you must refer to it sometimes in your internal discussions in drawing comparisons between yourselves and what happened with the original foundations of the model, because there are a great many similarities. You are, of course, faced with a problem that derives from a massive change on the landscape that is introduced, obviously, by the changing cultural views and economic views of your country. You also deal with a species that has been iconic within landscapes, particularly the grassland landscapes. And of course, therefore, its decline, its loss, is highly symbolic of what truly is a significant problem, a challenge, an affront to what otherwise should be greater conservation successes, even though we have had many. And furthermore, you face the issue that the species that you are concerned about is, of course, while highly locally adapted, and its vigility is such that it remains in relatively small areas. But as a species, it is expansive in the sense that it occurs across a wide range of political jurisdictions. And each of those political jurisdictions is unique, and each of those political jurisdictions, therefore, will pose its own challenges and opportunities to the things you seek to achieve. These are all very, very similar to the context of the North American model's own emergence. That was written at an even larger scale, perhaps, and dealt with many more species. But nevertheless, the inherent dynamics were largely the same, or at least comparable. And what was also comparable, which I think is particularly important for your effort, for your strategy, for your committees, for your leadership, is the fact that the only way out of the problems that faced wildlife in North America, at least Canada and the United States, which has been the sort of spatial world of our observation, our lens, if you will, that required, the challenge required a group of people to seize upon a problem of almost misunderstood scale to some extent, because it was difficult to grasp how serious and large the problem really was, but to essentially maintain the point of view that regardless of the scale of the challenge, they were going to ensure that wildlife writ large, in the case of the model and the traditions around it, were not lost. The odds of the North American model achieving against the primary and contrary economic, social, and religious and legislative paradigms in your country and in Canada, the odds were enormous, and they were all against the model's success. What led to its achievement, what led to its ultimate successes, it is not perfect, but it has many successes. What led to them, as I said, was a group of people who simply refused to accept the fact that elk and wild turkey and black bear and white-tailed deer and moose and grizzly bear and grouse and so on and so forth would disappear. And that was exactly what's happening. The line of population status for bobwhite quail is not the line we would wish for. But I can assure you that there were lines for many species that were far worse than the lines that we show continuously to identify the trends in bobwhite quail populations. And for many of those species, the recoveries have been extraordinary. They didn't come easy, they didn't come slowly, but they came. So I am always looking for those initiatives, as I said, which inspire. Because we have three problems in conservation in this world. Only three, you'll be happy to know. One is that too few people care. And the second is that those who do care are divided amongst themselves. And the third issue is that we have too little money. And part of the reason we have too little money, of course, is because too few people care. And those that do care are divided. It makes it hard to find and mobilize money under those circumstances. So what we need are initiatives that bring people together. What we need are initiatives that are able to demonstrate that they can stand for a long period of time, for long enough period of time that they will have encountered significant social and economic changes even in the time of their existence. They won't be reading about these changes, they will have been living through them. We need entities that are capable of showing the power of volunteerism. We need entities that do not leave science behind, but that in fact increase the scientific knowledge that we have around the particular problem or challenge that they seek to conquer. And we need entities that are capable of connecting directly with people. Now, why I was so first impressed with the initiative and with the membership and the individuals who were working on this bobwhite quail population was that it seemed to entertain all of that potential. And now as I look at it as a movement or an entity or a stride that has, what, 26 years of history now, that deals incredibly effectively with this private landowner community, which controls the vast majority or the majority of land in your country, that has mobilized this massive amount of new information. When I look at this entity, I see something that is absolutely priceless within the context of the North American conservation movement. There are others. Perhaps we have to reach, however, back historically to find some of the best examples, and obviously one of those is the North American Waterfowl Management Plan, the Act and the Convention of the Migratory Birds that of course led to the plan and so on. But that whole effort around the continent's waterfowl populations stands as one of the greatest achievements in conservation, not just on this continent. It stands as one of the greatest achievements in conservation in the world. There's absolutely no question about this. And it has very, very, very few competitors, even in the industrialized West, such as Europe, for example. And where such plans are emerging, they're emerging now, a century later than they emerged in North America. When I look at the relevancies of this initiative and of the body of people that you have working in cooperation across those 25 states, what I see is a chance for us to tie together the issue of an iconic species that people do care about, that is situated not only in a particular ecosystem that has been under massive threat, the grassland ecosystems, not only of your country, but of Canada as well, of course, and of a tie to people who have a choice about what will happen on that land. This is not a vague kind of bureaucracy at some federal level. This is the opportunity to actually work with people who own land, who may have had that land in some cases in their family for very long periods of time, who believe and have memories centered upon that land. And it is quite true that what perhaps is the greatest opportunity for you is to be able to unlock what is potentially residing within the hearts of those people. It is indeed, as was said, about how we can reach people and encourage them with respect to how they see the land and what they want to see come from it. We are living in a time where conservation has both become very much a common discussion in the media, but at the same time, where we are facing increasing challenges globally about what is happening to the world and the wild others that exist on it, along with ourselves. And so I think one of the things I would really encourage you to think about is that the process you have established, this volunteer network that has existed for over a quarter of a century, the fact that you are able to deal with this broad suite of political jurisdictions which have their own uniquenesses, as I've said, and that you are articulating now, especially in your new mission statement and in things that have evolved over time, I have seen this, of course, you are talking the language of soil conservation and of water and of pollinators and of the vast array of species and systems that the Bobwhite sort of stands iconically as a major and very visible component of. this too is an area where the Quail Initiative is leaning into the future. Because all of us have seen this movement in science and in policy over the last 15 or 20 years towards this idea of ecosystems and towards this idea of ecosystem services and the idea that ultimately human beings depend upon them, and that the fate of this little bird and the fate of the security of a country are not nearly so far apart as people at one time thought. As I look at the things that you have achieved, even the fact that you have made this issue of such high profile in the institutions such as AFWA as a national conservation need, the whole fact that you have been able to take your problem and place it higher. Yes, we want it to go even higher, but the fact that you've been able to take it and place it as high as you can. This is the achievement that everyone dealing with every problem in conservation seeks. No, you've not done enough, and you're your own worst critics, I'm sure. But you must understand that you have taken this issue over this period of 25 years from just a problem that a few people saw to a problem now that many people, many institutions, many government agencies, even federal agencies, as we just heard, are looking at, considering, worrying about, trying to help with, bring funding and other resources to. Well, I was talking about the capacity and the history, obviously, and the achievements that you have made, and pointing out that from somebody as an outsider and an observer, what that means to me. It really seems that the future is what we ought to be thinking about now. And I'd like to say just a few words about that with respect to the initiative and your team and what you're doing. Because of those strengths I have mentioned, because of the relationship with private landowners, first and foremost, which will be the transformative process of conservation in the United States, no question. Because of the fact that you have these linkages across 25 states and 25 agencies and the universities and the NGOs and so on and so forth, all of that you have been able to pull together. The fact that you've been able to move this from small scale individual enterprises to this whole idea of scaled up approaches between local areas and regional areas and so on, and then across the entire spectrum of the species distribution pretty much. Because you have the connection with the cultural identities of people who feel for their land. And because of the fact that you have withstood 25 years of change, I think that your initiative ought to be communicating even more and to a wider world the achievements that you have made. I realize, as I say this, that all of these things cost money. And all of these things require resources and talents, and that it is a constant struggle to provide those resources. I do understand this. But perhaps it is time for the Quail Initiative to think about these achievements and to also consider the possibility of bringing them to a wider world. And I don't mean just the world within the United States or the world of AFWA or the world of WMI or the world of regional meetings, the Western or Southeastern or whatever it might be, nor just helping to add to that 3,000 peer-reviewed publication list that can apply to this particular species. I'm thinking about trying to expand this much more broadly in the public sphere and much more broadly in the international sphere. Because I can tell you that as someone who works now 50% at least of my time on international issues in very different parts of the world, that they too are seeking these kinds of models. They too are trying to figure out how to go from recognizing a problem to building an infrastructure, a mature infrastructure to deal with that particular problem. And what they are most looking for, and I think other people in both our own countries are looking for this, is the inspiration to point out that no matter how big the problem is or how big the challenges are, there is a way to slowly, with determination, maturity, capacity, and commitment, to build something that is capable of dealing with this enormous challenge. Ultimately, all of us, you with this initiative, me with the efforts that I make, anybody working in conservation, we are fighting for the hearts and minds of people. We may need science to tell us what to do best, but ultimately, we only have license if we convince people that what we are doing is meaningful to them, and is part of the legacy of their own lives, that we give them something that their own life will matter for after they are gone. And I'm telling you, and with all the honesty I can, that I believe you have achieved this. And while I can't even think about the number of problems and detours and turns in the road that you have had to make to be able to get where you are, you have reached here. And I think you have a gift already that you need to think about giving to a much, much wider audience. And finally, for me, I will just say thank you, because I have spent a lot of time working for those who can't speak for themselves. And I am always, too, looking for examples that will show me that it is not a fight in vain. The line of bobwhite quail population numbers is one issue, a critical issue that must be dealt with. But don't ever assume that your only achievements will be turning that line around. You may keep focused on that as your holy grail, but honestly, you really already have achieved enormous things. And I offer you every encouragement I possibly can. And thank you for giving me the chance to speak to you today.